Welcome to Sustainability Solved podcast, where our mission is to help you solve sustainability problems in your organizations. If you're in business, a non-profit, or really an organization that wants to be more sustainable while fulfilling your purpose, you're in the right place. I'm your host, Will Richardson, Head of Ecosystems at 51 to Carbon Zero. And as ever, I'm joined by my wonderful co-host, Charlie Luxton. Charlie, how are you doing today?
I always like the way you say when you say my one. I think you go slightly soft. There's a slight softness in your voice, Will. It's very, very endearing.
It's true, though, isn't it?
It's very
true.
sweet of you. No, I'm excited about today's chat. I mean, Saskia's a kind of a real grown up, isn't she? She's a real player in this industry.
She is, and I think Blue Yonder are a fascinating company because they deal with the largest of organisations around the world. And almost, I mean, they're the level above our sponsor, 51 to Carbon Zero, because their ICP is 50 million to 2 billion. And I think Blue Yonder are above that. And so have that almost, I'm using my hands and most people will be listening to this, so I don't really know why I'm using my hands.
He is really using his hands, and they're very wide and high.
But, you know, they can encapsulate absolutely almost all of society and businesses to understand what's going on. And I think the conversation that you're just about to hear is testament to that. But equally, we can learn that I took quite a lot of positive out of it, actually.
Yeah, I think it's really positive. I mean, have a listen. See what you think. I mean, I think there's some really interesting stuff there. She's very, very nice and very knowledgeable and got a real drive. So I think without further ado, let's listen to Saskia and enjoy.
Welcome to Sustainability Solved podcast. I'm Will Richardson, and today we're pulling on a thread that connects every business in our audience, whether you're running a food brand, media agency, or a manufacturer, and that's your supply chain. And because for most organizations, that's where the bulk of your emissions actually live. And if you don't have visibility into it, then you can't really manage it.
So this month, we're talking to someone who has spent the better part of 2 decades trying to fix exactly that across government, cleaning products, fashion, and now one of the biggest supply chain software platforms on the planet. Saskia van Gendt is the Chief Sustainability Officer at Blue Yonder. Saskia, it's great to have you with us.
Thanks so much for having me. Really looking forward to the conversation.
So before we get into it, you started at the EPA and then Method and then Rothy's, and now you're sitting inside a tech company that powers supply chains for thousands of businesses globally. That's really quite a journey. What threads runs through all of this for you?
Well, my background is in environmental science and something called industrial ecology, and that's really the foundation of the science and data of sustainability. And I always return back to that as the methodology and the guiding force for developing strategy, no matter what industry or sector you're working with. And I think it was kind of important for me to work within manufacturing and fashion retail, especially from the Blue Yonder perspective. Now I bring a little bit of the empathy around building a sustainability program, working with our customers. I know directly where they're feeling challenged, where they may be getting stuck, because I've been through it myself. So I can use that to develop the strategy and solutions that hopefully match the need and the ambition that our customers have.
So could you just step back? Well, 2 things I want to ask, right? Firstly, industrial ecology, that sort of blows my mind. There's that amazing project, isn't there? Is it in Denmark where there's a coal-fired power station? I'm going to totally mangle the name of it, Katerinburg or something. What's it? Do you remember what it's called?
It is. You're on the right track, and now it starts with a K, and
it's very long.
But you're exactly right. That is the foundation of industrial ecology. And I studied in the Netherlands. There's a program there that brings together natural science, economics, and technology from 3 different Dutch schools. And they were looking at these examples of industrial ecology. I think Kalundborg was the one in Denmark.
That's it.
Where you have, kind of this ecosystem of manufacturers that are coordinated and sharing waste heat from one part of an operation that can be used in a different part. And so it really uses nature as inspiration, because in nature there is no waste. Everything is being used by another part of the system. So how do we design our industrial processes to be closer to nature in that efficiency?
I was very lucky. I went there to film. I filmed it all and interviewed all the people involved in it, and it was mind blowing. And whenever I give talks about sustainability, I sort of nearly always end up on a slide I love, which is of the kind of the flows in the ecosystem of the North Atlantic, based around sort of cod and herring and all of the ways that the catastrophic cascade of all the different bits of food. I find it such a beautiful diagram. And how are you bringing that way of thinking into the kind of roles that you're using, like you're looking at now in Blue Yonder?
So there's tools of industrial ecology. One of them is life cycle analysis. So that kind of allows you to do footprinting at a product level. You can do life cycle analysis of an entire manufacturing operation if you wanted to. But in practical terms, you can take those different metrics and tools and use them to inform business strategy. And what we're doing with Blue Yonder is bringing in emissions factors, which is essentially the life cycle footprint of a product, whether it be broccoli or maybe a sweater that's at a clothing manufacturer, and converting it into its carbon footprint. So they're still using that principle, the life cycle analysis principle, to come up with that emission factor. What Blue Yonder is doing is taking these vast data sets of emission factors. I think we now have more than 200,000 that sit in our sustainability data layer, and enable our customers that are retailers, manufacturers, logistics service companies to take those emission factors and the activity that they're managing and understand the carbon footprint of their operations.
And how does that change the kind of decision making does that sort of start to change decision making once you start to get that granularity and that information?
Absolutely. I think one of the most powerful ways that it can change behavior is through integration. And, I've been working in sustainability, as you mentioned, for about 20 years. And I've seen this progression from sustainability being kind of a standalone team. Maybe you have a small team that's operating as an independent function, to being integrated throughout the business and becoming more operationalized in how you can execute against sustainability goals. But the technology hasn't really kept pace with that organizational change management that's happened. So what we're seeing now is the opportunity to bring all of those metrics into supply chain management. So if you're trying to decide different transportation routes or different manufacturing plans, you can not only just look at the cost differences of different scenarios that you're evaluating, you can also look at all of the supply chain implications, whether it be service levels or speed to delivery, as well as the carbon and waste implication of those decisions. So it's very powerful to start to bring those metrics, which provide visibility at the point of decision making, and even allow you to optimize your future plans with carbon and waste in mind.
What have you seen that's, I guess, the most mind blowing? What have you seen stuff and you go, wow, I didn't expect that outcome?
Yeah, definitely. I think so. One of the interesting things about being now 100% focused on supply chain, because before, when I was at Rothy's and Method and even at the EPA, is that the sustainable practices were always kind of a premium, right? You're always asking your CFO to invest a little bit in renewable energy, which at the time was a lot more expensive. Or maybe it's a recycled resin to use in the bottle, which came at a premium. So there was always this kind of ROI that you're trying to communicate. Like, how do you increase the number of customers because of that investment? Or, how do you rationalize making that premium investment? With supply chain optimization, it's kind of exciting because there are a lot more examples where it's a win-win. And you can see that taking miles or kilometers out of your transportation network, filling fuller truckloads, it's not only reducing the cost, it's also, because of reduced fuel use, it's also reducing the carbon emissions. So this is very powerful for our customers that want to make progress towards the goals that they've stated, but also do feel those cost constraints and are not always able to make the premium investment.
Because it sort of feels like for the first part of your career, you were pushing the boulder up the hill, and maybe you were at the top of the hill now. Maybe, that kind of cost, that value return that you're starting to get from optimization is actually the boulder starting to go down the hill and making the job slightly easier, despite the headwinds of current administration, et cetera, et cetera. Do you think that's a reasonable assumption?
It is, because there's still a lot of inefficiency in supply chains, and that inefficiency is what we're going after. We're not necessarily trying to change entire behaviors of organizations. We're going after the waste, whether it be carbon waste or physical waste that inherently sits within these inefficient supply chains. And the reason, that the waste occurs is that most companies don't have the visibility for all the different decisions that are making. There's not necessarily what we call an end-to-end supply chain management happening. And that leads to waste that can be addressed through technology.
So, Scope 3 seems to be the big sort of chunk of all of this in most companies, doesn't it? And Scope 3, I'm going to ask you in a second to give your definition of it, because I find everyone's got a slightly different one. But Scope 3 seems to be the hard one to measure, and hard to measure and to act on. How are you understanding it, framing it, measuring it, and then acting because of that measurement?
Yeah, so quickly with the definition. So there is the greenhouse gas protocol, which most companies are following, which has the definitions for Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 carbon emissions. Scope 1 emissions are direct emissions. So if you are a coal plant, all of the emissions coming out of your smokestack, those are Scope 1 emissions. If you are an office building, all of the electricity that you're purchasing to power your computers and your HVAC, that is Scope 2 emissions. And then Scope 3 emissions are simply your value chain emissions. So all of the emissions associated with your supply chain, along with things like employee travel and things that are indirect. So when it comes to Blue Yonder and what we're enabling, we are providing that direct visibility for Scope 3 emissions that has been very challenging for companies to quantify and optimize, because by its very nature, they are indirect. If you are a grocery store, you can look inside your operations, you can reduce the refrigeration loads, you can change your lighting to be more efficient. But working with your suppliers, changing the transportation and warehousing where all of those products are coming in, that historically has been really challenging. So that's really the Scope 3 carbon emissions that we're addressing. And by providing the visibility, allowing our customers to use all of the activity that they're managing through supply chain management, whether that be truckloads, warehouse levels, inventory levels, converting that into carbon. Now they can have that visibility. They have much more accurate data, and they have the tools to be able to address those emissions.
And are you finding people taking that data and that information and using that to sort of try and change their upstream supply chain as well? So obviously, if you've got a very carbon intensive product coming in, that there's inefficiencies on upstream behavior. Are you seeing that sort of next level of, I suppose this is where you get to industrial ecology, isn't it? You're starting to get feedback loops and the nervous system working. Are you starting to kind of witness that?
Definitely. So there's tiers of supply chain, right? So your tier 1 suppliers would be the suppliers that you have direct relationships with. So again, going back to a grocery customer, I think food is very easy to understand because we're all going to the grocery shops and eating food all the time. So the grocery customer will have relationships with the broccoli supplier, the packaged goods cereal manufacturers. But the cereal manufacturers, they own the relationship with the oat farms or the sugar cane manufacturers. So the grocery store has indirect influence over all of the in-tier suppliers. So one thing that we're enabling through our network solution is the ability not just to have direct relationship and ESG assessment of your tier 1 suppliers, but to understand the implications of your in-tier suppliers. And one of the things that I was mentioning, bringing a little bit of empathy into this role, when I was trying to influence the supply chain for previous companies that I worked with, you end up in this kind of like survey fatigue because you're asking your immediate suppliers, hey, what is your oat farm doing? What is the sugarcane manufacturer doing? And then everyone's feeling that fatigue up and down the supply chain. But through Network, now you can ease that reporting burden. There's a lot more visibility into the performance. You can use risk overlays. We have an integration with a risk management platform that can tell you, is there carbon or is there flooding risk associated with that oat farm that you might need to be aware of? So now through technology, you can really have so much more visibility and understand not only where those risks are, but also where the opportunities lie.
So just to be clear, so you're saying that in the process of understanding the carbon emissions, up-tier carbon emissions or in-tier carbon emissions, you're also starting to sort of bolt on other sort of intelligence, if you like, kind of corporate intelligence to that stream, so that there's knock-on benefits for the company that is sort of finding this information out.
Absolutely. I mean, I was mentioning more the ESG implications and the risks associated with those in-tier suppliers, but there's also the ability to take in geopolitical risk and that the tariff volatility. And so you can see how all of these global implications that are changing on a sometimes hourly basis, how those may be affecting your indirect supplier relationships.
And you're seeing changes in behavior because of this information.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's where it comes into the companies that we're working with tend to be the larger multinationals, and they have a lot of footprint, right? They have a huge scope 3 footprint, but they also have a lot of scope 3 influence because they have buying power. They can decide if they have oat farm A or oat farm B. Oat farm B has a lower carbon footprint, has better labor practices, lower climate risk associated with its location. They can use that data to preferentially source from supplier B, so that those tools end up being really valuable. And then you're kind of automating the selection. So if you have an option to just buy from supplier B for all of your oat needs, then you can go directly to supplier B and know that you have a lower carbon footprint and better ESG performance.
And you've just bought a business in the UK, Pledge Earth Technologies. Now that should help understanding the emissions from a accredited point of view, shouldn't it?
Yeah, so we've been doing acquisitions. I would just back up a little bit from a product development perspective, and I'm only a few years into software, so this is all kind of new and interesting to me. But when you're designing new software, you can either build it yourself, you can partner with somebody who's maybe doing it better than you, or you can buy that technology. And we had an opportunity to acquire Pledge to move much faster on the development that we currently were doing in-house. And the Pledge product was a great product, beautiful user interface, very intuitive, and it has GLEC accreditation as well as an ISO accreditation on that methodology, which is really powerful for our customers that have to meet regulatory reporting requirements. They're meeting stakeholder reporting requirements. So that allowed us to accelerate the product development that we were doing in-house. We were able to use that technology now bolted into the Blue Yonder transportation management solution that customers are using to understand where their trucks are going, where their air freight's going, and to optimize all of those routes. Now that intelligence around the carbon footprint of those decisions is integrated into that solution, we've also integrated it with our network solution that I was mentioning that shows you the in-tier performance of your suppliers.
Yeah, because it's really interesting, isn't it? It's the quality of that data that is absolutely. I mean, I think I'm not saying it's the most important thing. I think actually just the act of reporting and going out and trying to find this stuff out means that the quality of the data gets better over time. And even if the information is not completely accurate, I think it is a really important feedback mechanism for decision making. But ultimately, if you're going to start nailing your flag to the pole and saying this is carbon neutral, you have to trust those figures, don't you? And more importantly, there has to be sort of a cross-sector trust of those figures. I mean, and are you seeing? Obviously, you've made this acquisition because you've seen an opportunity to accelerate that. But are you seeing this across the entire piece? This real push towards credible, reliable data?
Yeah, a few things I would point to. So, one is there is a maturity curve when it comes to scope three or supply chain quality data. And a lot of companies are still using cost based considerations. So, that just simply says, I spent 100,000 pounds on oats, and you use a conversion factor that takes pounds to carbon. That's a really kind of easy way to do just get an estimate of the carbon footprint of that, but it doesn't tell you anything about your specific source of oats. If you have supplier A and supplier B could be much more efficient than that estimate, but it's still very common for companies to use that spend-based accounting system. If you move forward in the maturity, what we're offering now is the ability to use real supplier data and real transactions that are happening in your supply chain to convert it into real carbon numbers. So that gives you a lot more understanding of what your true footprint is, but also leverage to be able to make decisions that truly reduce your emissions, not just tell you to spend less on something.
And I mean, how are you finding the sort of regulatory or business environment with the current sort of administration in the US and certainly, which is, I think, led to a slight change of tone across the Western world? Certainly, are you seeing a slowdown, or or it's not being particularly impacted?
So the companies that we're working with, I mentioned, they're mostly large multinationals. So they're operating in the US, Europe, Asian countries, even some of the states in the US that have their own carbon reporting and requirements, like California, Oregon, New York. So what we've really seen with our customers is they've been integrating sustainability strategies into their businesses now for 20 years, as long as I've been working in sustainability. They now have department level mandates that have to be achieved by their supply chain teams, their product sourcing teams. They all have their own mandates, and they have executive compensation tied to meeting these sustainability targets. So the maturity that's come along with these investments in sustainability and commitments are really woven into the fabric of these companies. And they have not just the regulatory environment in the US or maybe specific states in the US, but they're meeting the standards that are in place in Europe. So we're seeing still a ton of pressure from CSRD for one. There's the carbon border adjustment mechanism that charges based on the carbon intensity of your sourcing locations if you're importing into Europe. So there's a lot of regulatory drivers for the companies that we're working with. And they're really staying the course because they have it woven into their systems. They have the mandates there, and they're continuing to feel the regulatory pressure.
In a way, it's very similar to what we've seen with Brexit and the fact that most British companies haven't actually seen a change in regulatory requirements because they've still having to adhere because they're working in the EU.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. And it's a global supply chain, is especially the companies that we're working with. It's very global in nature, and it makes sense to take that view on sustainability as well.
Yeah.
So some good news there. You think that irrespective of the kind of general erosion of ambitions, that actually within the business world, grown-ups are staying the course?
Well, that, and also the targets that have been set are 2030 targets, 2040 targets. So you can't really take a break on that. You have to make incremental progress if you want to be meeting those goals.
So you mentioned that a lot of your software is or your expertise are applied to large multinational companies at this point, which is amazing to hear. And how do you see the kind of the thinking and the work that you're doing at that scale starting to trickle down into the SMEs, the medium-sized small enterprises? I mean, how much of an impact is this way of thinking either having or going to have on the wider business community?
I think part of it goes into the inherent connectivity of supply chains. So if we're working with those larger multinational manufacturers, let's say, they're pushing those mandates into their immediate suppliers that may be a small or medium enterprise that's serving aluminum, or maybe they're providing a surfactant to that larger company. Now those requirements are being pushed into that next tier. And then same thing we were talking about before around that in-tier visibility, the surfactant supplier is pushing those requirements deeper in. So I think there's kind of two approaches that need to be happening at the same time. Just because of the way that Scope 3 emissions work, Scope 3 emissions are inherently somebody else's Scope 1 or Scope 2 emissions. So we can have every single company, whether it be a huge company or a really small company, addressing their immediate emissions, and we're good. Or we can have what's happening now, where you have a combination of large multinationals pushing those requirements deeper into their supply chain, and smaller actors also choosing to be responsible.
One of the things is the thing I know mainly about supply chain is a friend of mine did a PhD in AI 25 years ago, and his whole thing was about mail deliveries and making them more efficient using AI. So that's the first time I ever really heard about it back in the day. Obviously, things have moved on. How are you finding AI impacting what you're doing, and the kind of upsides and downsides of that in your industry?
Yeah, well, we've been using AI in different forms of AI for a long time at Blue Yonder, and now there's a lot of focus on generative AI and things like ChatGPT, where you can go and kind of ask uniform questions. Those have huge language models behind them, and they're being trained, in lots of specific ways. But there's also small format AI that we've been incorporating to power optimization in our solutions for many, many years. So when I think about AI from a sustainability perspective, especially when it comes to supply chains, it has the potential to be a supercharger for all of the optimization that we can enable through the supply chain optimization, because you have higher quality data, you have more real-time information coming in, you're taking out human error in some of the decisions that are being made. So that has enormous potential to benefit all of the waste that we were talking about that currently sits in supply chains. At the same time, if I put my sustainability hat on, there's very active conversations around the increased energy use and increased water use, in particular around AI, especially data center growth. So we need to make sure that there's this accounting that we're responsible for, where we do see that reduction occurring from adoption of AI that is a net benefit compared to the increased energy use that we see around increased adoption of AI. So it's too soon really to tell where that accounting is going to land. Estimates from the Boston Consulting Group say that AI has the potential to reduce carbon emissions by 10%. But again, we need to make sure, and sustainability teams need to be at the table so that we're influencing all the ways that AI is being used, and continue to make sure that balance sheet is in our favor.
And that's across all industries, or just within logistics, supply chain?
That's across all industries, yeah, because there's tons of AI applications. Even if you look at improving recycling processes, or being able to enable the return of products and remanufacturing. So tons of different applications that can influence not only the carbon footprint, but also waste.
Because of your reach as an organization, you're working with such big organizations, you must have such deep insights into what's actually happening within supply chains. Have you seen any trends appearing, anything that you go, actually that's really good that that's happening?
Well, I would say this, in taking a bit of a long view around sustainability becoming more integrated into companies. I was just talking with one of our grocery retailers that's based in Canada, and they have carbon mandates at the company level, and then they've been given, their supply chain teams have also been given carbon reduction targets. And to date, those teams have been operating kind of separately. They've not been sharing data. They don't always have the same visibility for how their decisions are affecting those bigger company goals. So now through technology, they can see if they're taking route A versus route B, what the carbon implications of those decisions are. So now they have much more information to be able to act in a way that's consistent with the mandate that they've been given. So really see a huge trend in technology being an enabler for breaking down silos across organizations, providing metrics and tools to be able to not just focus on backwards kind of hindsight reporting, which has been a big focus for sustainability for a long time, but being able to empower those teams to make decisions that are directly affecting their future footprint.
One of the things I'm sort of interested in with the year of sort of volatility around tariffs and international trade, and sort of arguably the sort of rewriting of the international trade sort of environment. What do you think the implications of nearshoring, of friendshoring is likely to be? Are we likely to see a shortening of supply chains? Are we what is the thinking coming out of your organization? That's a big crystal ball I'm asking you to look into, but I'm kind of interested in what are people thinking?
No, it is fascinating. So what we are seeing is, I think around 30% of companies are making decisions around changing the locations of different, whether it be sourcing locations or manufacturing locations based on tariffs. So we are seeing that tariffs are influencing our customers to change their supply chains. One thing that I was looking at specifically is if you're moving your operations, let's say from Thailand to China, or from Canada to China, what does that mean in terms of the carbon intensity of that decision? Because we know that most countries and even regions within countries have different mixes when it comes to renewable energy, coal, natural gas, nuclear. That all influences the carbon intensity of any of the manufacturing in that region. So the implications can be enormous. If companies are shifting from China, which historically has been a really carbon intensive area to manufacture, and going to a lower carbon intensity country, then it will have a net benefit in terms of total carbon. But we're really seeing that happen in real time as those decisions are being made.
Yeah, I mean, that's what is sort of slightly mind-blowing is when you look at two solar panels, the difference in carbon intensity of what effectively basically do the same thing, look almost identical, but they can be half the carbon intensity because of where they're manufactured, and that's a
Right.
That's a massive decision-making process, isn't it? Within procurement.
Yes, it's massive. And we are seeing our software historically has been helping companies optimize for cost because they're having to make all sorts of different sourcing decisions. Maybe the supplier can't provide a good, so they have to go to a different supplier, and that changes their transportation. It changes where they're warehousing from. So all of the software has been designed to take in all of these different attributes. Now we can add in things like carbon intensity of sourcing locations if companies want to make tariff-based decisions to also advance their carbon reduction goals. Or I mentioned earlier the carbon border adjustment mechanism. We have customers that are also deciding if they should be sourcing from country A or country B into Europe, because that does essentially add a tariff on that import.
And you're seeing businesses actually use, because you've got a scenario planning tool, haven't you, at Blue Yonder? And are you seeing companies actually using this to make decisions?
Absolutely. And they need technology to take in all the different costs that can occur because there's so many different variables. And if they're changing one thing because of a tariff, it could have a huge implication on costs because they're maybe increasing their transportation or changing their warehouse relationship. So ultimately, they need to understand the total cost picture of those decisions. Now they can also see the total carbon cost of those decisions.
It's fascinating. I mean, we do this on a tiny, when we're looking at a building, we do life cycle carbon modeling, and it's quite extraordinary. You look at two products. Again, I talked about solar panels, but even something like wood fiber. Wood fiber insulation, and actually traditionally, the Polish supply energy system was incredibly coal intensive. So, what looks like a great product suddenly is like, oh no, that's not so good. We've got to try. And it's amazing that you can get just sort of too much information, and also, do you trust that information is the second thing. So it's very interesting that giving people access to real life data? Because I mean, and let's be very clear, I mean, the tariff environment evolves tweet by tweet, doesn't it? I mean, are you keeping up with that, or is it?
It's constantly changing, for sure. There is, you were mentioning too much information, and I think that there is a point when you have to understand your baseline and understand how your decisions are affecting that. There is an effort in Europe, kind of led by Europe, to take a more scorecard approach to all the different attributes that can be fed into decisions. And just like we have now nutrition labels that tell you, calories and fat, and, they're trying to standardize a bit of that information and create more apples to apples comparisons to take some of that overload of data and really distill it into something that people can make decisions on.
Now, you came from Rothy's, where you were dealing with vertically integrated manufacturing, everything under one roof, and now you're kind of completely the opposite, aren't you? I mean, you're just moving, understanding the kind of the full ecosystem of supply chain. What are the biggest mistakes that you're seeing organizations making that result in unnecessary waste?
So I mentioned before that now there's a trajectory around end-to-end supply chain management. And before, and historically, it's been much more kind of point solutions. So companies would have transportation management. They would have teams that are just looking at transportation plans, what trucks, where are they coming, A to B, but they're operating in a silo. And they're not seeing how their decisions may be affecting the total performance of their company. So I think one of the biggest kind of pivots that we're seeing, and it's really necessary, is taking a more end-to-end sustainable supply chain management view, having connected data that can help break down silos within organizations, because that's also where we see this kind of leakage and waste occurring. One example, I was just talking with a manufacturer where they had made a packaging change, and it was very well informed, and they were reducing the overall weight of the package. They were seeing material savings, and also some savings when it comes to some of their plastic reduction goals. But in the downstream, they saw an increase in damage in the warehouse, and they saw that they were actually making additional trips because they had to correct for that. So this is where having that total picture around how decisions made in one part of the supply chain or in one part of the business can ripple through and have a net benefit if you have that data all in one place.
And you talked about that supermarket in Canada and how you have separates, they sat separately. How do you close that gap with people? Like, what is it that we can do in order to help a much more fulfill a picture?
Yeah, I mean, technology is an incredible lever for that. And it's taking what used to be very siloed data from one individual department and enabling other teams to see that data in real time. So that's incredibly powerful, but it also has to come with change management in the organization. It's a new way of acting. So if you're a transportation planner and you have the option of route A or route B, it is a shift for you to say, I'm not just going to look at the quickest option. I'm also going to look at cost and carbon as I'm making that decision. So it does require education. You can have the technology, and having that visibility is really important, but also you need to empower and teach your teams around how using that advances the goals that they've been set.
I love this idea of breaking out of silos into networks. I feel like there's something incredibly powerful about that, and the fact that you're looking at how computer AI or even simple software can just give that visibility and make people just think more dynamically and more beneficial in the widest possible sense is incredibly positive. So where do you think we go from here? What are the next big sort of steps in supply chain, in AI, in industrial ecology that sort of keep you in the good fight, if you know what I mean?
So I think I would say the reason that I came to Blue Yonder was the scale that now we can enable through the companies that we're working with, these large multinationals. and to empower them not just to have fantastic sustainability accounting and measurement and reporting, but to really change their future plans to mitigate carbon and waste. That's incredibly exciting because it's going after what has been historically really, really challenging for companies to address. We just see that companies that are growing, and every company wants to grow, right? Grow or die. Those companies' footprints were growing linearly with their profitability and their overall production growth. Now we can see a decoupling of that because you can go after some of the waste that occurs. You can have greater scale and leverage through your suppliers. So there's all of these tools that are kind of coming together to enable future decarbonization.
So it's breaking that. You said profit and volume, but also therefore carbon intensity. That we're seeing a break between carbon intensity and profitability as well.
Yep, and another tool of industrial ecology or term is the decoupling of those two systems. So you can decouple your growth from your environmental footprint.
We're seeing more companies put bonus structures together around that, actually, which is great to see. If you could have one piece of advice, not about technology, but about mindset or culture, to the business leaders that are listening to this, what do you think could genuinely move the needle, and what do you think they should be doing?
Well, just speaking to the mindset or culture shift, the biggest opportunity is to think about sustainability not just as the right thing to do, but to see how it can make your business and your operations more resilient. And we see that in the face of all of the global volatility that we're seeing around tariffs, geopolitical. The more that you have the supply chain visibility and accountability, the more resilient against those risks and threat your business will be. So it's really shifting from something that you think you should be doing because it's the right thing to something that will make your business much stronger.
I was talking to someone about regenerative farming. He's a regenerative. They do grain called Wild Farmed, and I saw that the grain output had massively slumped last year. Terrible in the UK. Terrible weather. Terrible season for growing grain. Worst on record. And I said, so well, how's that for you guys? And he said, well, I mean, it's not great, but it's actually good for us because when you have regenerative soil, you have better soil, healthier soil. It's more robust. So when we have droughts, we have more water retention. We're better. So in a way, these are the kind of the knock-on benefits, these kind of unseen benefits that I think a lot of people haven't understood until now, and are starting to realize that it can be a win-win.
Absolutely. And I think renewable energy is another example of that. We have wars happening around fossil fuels, and the resilience that comes from renewable energy, which is free energy from the sun or from wind, and the longevity that can bring is another good example of that.
Thank you so much for being so direct and practical about some of the conversations that we've had today. It's been absolutely fascinating talking to you and listening to how we can really try to change that supply chain.
My pleasure. Thank you both for great questions and for shining a light on all of the sustainable supply chain opportunities that we have.
So if people want to find out more about Blue Yonder or your work, where should they go?
Please connect with me on LinkedIn and go to blueyonder.com. We have information about our new sustainable supply chain management solutions there. A lot of case studies from customers that we're working with and real metrics around the business value that's coming from that. So encourage people to check it out.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Saskia. That was really interesting and really inspiring, actually, to understand how the little things we're doing in our company are being applied by, dare I say it, by the grown-ups in the real world. So, carry on the good work.
Thanks so much. You too.
Thank you. Wow, that was brilliant, wasn't it?
Yeah, I really enjoyed that. She was so reassuring that there's people like that in the room dealing with these very large corporations. And what's fascinating and what's so good to hear, from what she's saying, the large multinationals, they're not changing their trajectory. They're not changing their plans, irrespective of what is going on in the slightly crazy world out there politically. these big companies are staying on tracks. And also the fact she talked about that carbon and cash, you can decouple profit growth from carbon emission growth, which is the holy grail. But secondly, that actually in being more sustainable, you can save money. And those two things are great takeouts.
Yeah. And the fact that they work in a supply chain, which, I mean, from my experience, covers 70% plus of one's emissions in an organization. And it's that cascade, kind of, I don't know, change or systemic change that can happen within the supply chain. Because if you've got those very large, big players wanting to understand that supply chain, then that impacts all of us because we all sit there somewhere, one way or another.
And it's just, it feels to me like they're wiring or supercharging the nervous system of society, if you like, or business society, and therefore, society. And without the feedback, you can't change behavior. And very much, if you understand where things are going wrong down supply chain, you can make a big impact. I mean, I know there's some stats that she didn't actually mention that, with the right supply chain manufacturing control, in modern AI-driven supply chain control, you can drop your inventory by 35%. That's huge, right? I mean, that is absolutely great. That's what independent research is sort of suggesting. So this is not insubstantial amounts of saving. And if there's savings not having to hold that stuff, then there's savings in, hopefully in waste and in cost and in sustainability can come and align with this increased profitability, which I think is very, very good.
I thought it was interesting when they talked about tariffs and how tariffs are affecting the environment and sustainability and the nearshoring and how people are changing their supply chains because of.
Well, I mean, that's, like it or dislike it, that's exactly what, Trump's ambition is, isn't it? Is to break the level of offshoring that's gone on, or to reverse that and to bring it back. And, I think it's happening at a specific point in time where modern manufacturing is allowing labor costs to become less significant. And so, like it or loathe it, it certainly is impacting. It's certainly impacting. I'm also very interested. She talked about carbon intensity of manufacturing locations. One would, China peaked. China's carbon emissions peaked. Their energy generation carbon emissions are dropping. Their carbon emissions are dropping. So they are going to, and the level of investment in renewables means that I think very quickly you will find they're one of the most sustainable places to manufacture. Interestingly enough, my brother, who gets things made, as industrial design engineer, was phoning around recently for some quotes to get some stuff manufactured. And he phoned a company to make a load of stuff from in metal. And they were like, "Are you getting quotes made in China for getting it made in China?" I said, "Well, I was going to phone them." And they said, "Well, look, if you're going to phone China, we won't even bother quoting because our energy costs are the same as their entire manufacturing costs."
Right. Wow.
That's how expensive energy has become here. So,
yeah. But I'm actually doing quite a lot of talk on LinkedIn at the moment about energy costs and why we couple our energy against the lowest amount of energy we need, i.e. gas. So our price of gas is
strike price.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous.
And more importantly, if you look at the way it is, we strike price at 97% or something like that. Yes. You look at some countries, they're like, the average is 30. Denmark, like 5 or 6. I mean, these figures aren't. The point is, we have created a ridiculously expensive system, and then we blame it on renewables.
Yeah,
and it's like, no, it's not. It's not to do with renewables. It's to do with a really crap system that you've invented, and you're sticking with.
Yeah. And you've just highlighted a very easy use case of why that shouldn't happen. Because that manufacturing we should be the same. It being able to be in competition with China. And actually, it means we're traveling for less. There is some positives that's come out of this whole the Trump tariff stuff. And you can see actually that it could work quite well.
We'll see. We'll see about that. But anyway, for anyone to come on this podcast and talk about industrial ecology makes my heart sing. I love the concept of industrial ecology, this idea that the waste streams of one supply chain system can become the kind of the raw resources for another, and you can share waste, heat and water and energy. And it's something that we try in our projects an awful lot, and we're constantly trying to bring into the projects we're doing. So the fact that someone's taking that thinking and that sort of relatively abstract thinking from 20 years ago is now, right in the room, the boardroom, fills me with happiness.
Yeah.
Anyway, well, that was a good one.
What's
next?
It was.
Do we know what's next?
I don't. I actually am thinking that we should probably interview our new sponsors and find out where they're from, what they're doing, and why they've decided to sponsor us.
Okay. Well, that's brilliant. Let's get that organised, and we'll interview 51 to Carbon Zero.
Awesome. Wicked. I'll get that. Sorry. Thank you.
I'm Charlie Luxton.
And I'm Will Richardson. And between us, we solve sustainability.
Well, we make a start. Thank you for listening. See you soon.
I also work for 51 to Carbon Zero. And I'm building a really vibrant community where we're helping each other with sustainability issues, whether it's what's going on in the world, whether it's how you want to talk to clients because of stuff that's happening, and really just helping each other with communications, helping each other understand how better to enhance our skill sets and our, superhero stuff that we're really, really good at. And we're a community of people that are just trying to work in sustainability, helping organizations become more sustainable. There's a lot of sustainability words in there. But thanks for staying till the end. Contact me, DM me, wherever you get this podcast. And as a little surprise, I've just left some outtakes for you because we don't get it right first time, but I don't think anyone does.
I'm Charlie Luxton.
And I'm Will Richardson. And
Thank you for joining us.
We solve sustainability.
We might need to do that last bit again. Should we do that last bit again?
Okay.
Right, so let's do it. Let's get that booked up and we'll talk to 51 to 0.
Carbon Zero.
No,
You've got to know the name of our sponsor.
I know, okay, I'll do it again.
Just before we dive back into the episode, I wanted to quickly share something that might interest you, especially if today's conversation has got you thinking about your own sustainability work. Some of the things we hear most in this industry are, I wish I could connect with other people doing this work, or I'd love to turn my sustainability expertise into something more. Well, 51 to Carbon Zero, the sponsor of this podcast, have created their own referral network. And it does exactly that. This isn't about selling you something, it's actually about helping you make money while building the sustainability community we all need. So here's what's in it for you. First, you get to join a genuine community of sustainability experts who share knowledge, refer work to each other, and solve problems together. So, no more working in isolation. Secondly, there's real money involved. There's 10% plus commission on software referrals. We're talking about projects that go from 30 grand up to 100 grand. Plus, you'll be able to boost your presence by taking part in our fireside chats. I've actually got an email in front of me from Louise Stevens, one of the ambassadors, and it says that all her clients are genuinely happy because she's got a great partner and her clients love them. But here's the bigger picture. You'll be helping accelerate the sustainability transition that we all desperately need. Every referral, every connection, every collaboration moves us closer to the world we're all working towards. If this resonates with you and you want to earn some extra income, click the link in our show notes to become a 51 to Carbon Zero ambassador. Okay, back to the show.